So it's taken a bit of time to get it organised, but I've managed to get some cable. I imported it out of China. I was able to get about 16 or 17 metres of the stainless steel cable. It has a rubber insert in the actual hose, and the entire length of that cable ended up costing me about the same as what it would cost me for one of these hoses. And the biggest differences with it is, apart from the expense, in Australia these sort of things are really expensive. It's around about $30 a metre for the hose over here, and the crimps themselves cost $20, $25 each or something like that. The two major reasons why I've done this is, number one, I felt that the thickness of this hose was a little bit too much. Given that I'm actually going to be using a number of different hoses in the torso and in the arm and leg and all that sort of stuff, I wanted to have a slightly thinner hose so that it doesn't look too crowded when it's all done. And the other thing is that these ones that have the crimps on them, whilst technically that is a genuine hydraulic hose, I don't particularly like the length and the crimping that they've done as well. So what I'm going to do is actually make up some fake crimps that are a little bit more custom, that actually fit these hose, and just, for want of a better term, just look a little bit prettier than these ones. I still want them to have a similar sort of look with the hydraulic, nuts and bolts factor of it and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just going for a slightly different look, and I'm going to show you how I achieve that. All up, I'm going to be making probably 20 or 30 of these. Keep in mind that there's one on either end of the cable. Some of them actually have a bend, some of them don't. What I've got is a piece of stainless steel that I've made up as a jig, or as a little tiny mandrel piece. I'm going to use my anvil with this and everything else. Essentially what you can see is I've cut these that are slightly longer than the piece. These are longer than what I'm going to actually end up using at the end. I'll probably end up cutting off a little bit. It may end up getting used for something else, otherwise I'll just melt it down in my foundry. But the reason why that's simply that length is so that I'm not whacking my fingers when I'm actually trying to do this. So I'm just using a large drill piece to deburr the inside of it. It really only has to be done on one side. And it just has to be done enough that I can actually slide that little piece in there like that. Then once I sit that on the anvil, you can see how this starts to work. Okay, so you can probably see that just in the top there. I can't immediately just knock that over, so what I've got to do is just try and roll that edge there first. It doesn't matter too greatly where this one sits initially, as long as it's not poking out the end there too much. I can just start rolling and knocking that over. And I just spin it as I go. Once that starts to roll that edge over, I can then change my angle a little bit and start coming in from the top. Okay, I'll let that slide out just that little bit so that I can get that folded over just that little bit more. And I'm just rotating it because I want it to be consistent. This is obviously a handmade piece, but I want it to look like a machine-made piece at the end, so it needs to be pretty reasonable sort of quality. So I'm just flaring that in and closing the top of that aluminium over the top. I don't want to go too crazy with hitting it because I don't really want to flatten it so much as I just want to actually fold that edge over. Now I can tell pretty much when I've got it close, because when I hold it in the end there, that now doesn't fall through. It sits in there nice and neatly, and it folds that edge over nice and neatly as well. So that's basically the process. I'll now trim this down and clean it up and attach it to the end of the cable so you can see how it's going to look at the end. The other thing obviously is that this hole that's in there, so the length that, the extra length that I've allowed in that little piece of pipe, that fold over allows to make the correct size hole. Okay, and that means that I can still gain access to the inside of the hose, and I'll just show you what that looks like now. Okay, so once it's cut and polished up, you can sort of see the difference there. It's around about the same sort of length, but it doesn't have these crimp parts in it. The piece I've put in there is, as much as anything else, just a sample piece, so you can sort of see the difference. I may end up going for a piece a little bit thicker than that. That might be alright in places like on the arms or something like that, where you actually, you know, where I want a thinner piece. The hose and everything else will remain pretty standard, but on a leg piece or on something where, you know, on the top of the shoulder, for instance, where it needs to have a little bit more beefiness sort of looking to it, I will probably add a thicker piece to keep it sort of consistent. I'm not a big one for making things look pretty, but I do think that that will look a lot tidier once it's completed in all the parts of the endoskeleton sort of things. This hose too is actually quite flexible, so it's quite nice for what I'm actually trying to achieve as well. In some of the other ones I may actually stick a wire down the center of this to actually give it a bit more body, to give it a bit more strength where I don't want it to be flexible. That stays on there pretty solidly as well once it's attached. The idea behind it is because it's not really a hydraulic piece, this is actually a solid piece rather than a tube. So it means that I can actually jam that down in the end there, and it removes the need for it to be crimped on, because the pressure of me pushing that in there expands the hose inside there and pushes it up in such a way that it won't come off. So that's pretty much it.